Hi team, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prab. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Pushpendra. More than colleague, he's my friend, my brother, and sometime I stuck in some cloud security. He's the guy who basically settle out those things. And it is we already did one session in past, and it was a great hit. So I thought let me have a session again on and I requested him, and it is his generosity and it is his giving back to society that he decided to give the session on zero trust architecture, which is nowadays buzzword. And I'm sure after this particular session, you get a more visibility about zero trust, how actually zero trust implement in the organization. It is not only about no trust but verify, but it is more than that. Uh, we take a lot of reference from ChatGPT and Wales. Based on that, we assume about zero trust. But let me bring the engineer, the practitioner who actually implemented zero trust in the organization. So whatever the session is going to be on zero trust today, it is all about the practical insight, his wisdom, his thoughts on this particular topic. When you're talking about Pushpendra, 15 plus year of experience he had the experience on network, he has experience on cloud. So it is not something, it's all theory. It is all about the practical insight, how we're going to do that. And I know Pushpendra, even once upon a time he has some questions regarding on some topics. I have to think twice before answering those questions. I have to verify, validate everything, because he's not a simple student to handle, to be frank. So hi Pushpendra, how are you?
Uh, Good, Pravin. It's always a pleasure to be having this chat with you. Yeah, you are more of a mentor to me or my guru, as you're well known in the industry. So it's always pleasure to be sharing the same platform with you, and then sharing whatever knowledge we've gained through our experience in the industry, and then always good to spread this across and making sure that our wonderful peers who are operating in the industry can learn from it, and then if it's helpful, they can implement it someday as well.
Thanks, Pushpender. Bhai. See, guys, it's a weekend, and Saturday, Sunday, especially when people are working Canada, Australia, and all that. This is the time of party. But taking out the time for this particular session is really kudos, Pushpender. Bhai. Thank you so much. I know it's a evening there, so instead of having a party, you're having a session with coffee.
No, this is much better. And what better way to end the weekend than just having a good chat with my friend? And obviously, it's the benefit, additional benefit here is that a lot of other people will get to watch this video, and then also I'm able to just participate and give maybe 1% more contribution to the good work that you've been doing for the community as a whole in security. And I think that's great. So any opportunity I welcome it with open arms.
Thanks. And right, we did the last session on cloud security. It was a great hit. I think a lot of people have reached out to you. And I personally feel the content was next level. So we are expecting the same in zero trust also. So before wasting your time, let's directly jump to the conclusion and discuss about the zero trust. So what is this buzzword about zero trust? If you want to
Yeah, I
explain in
think
layman term, yeah.
yeah. So zero trust, what it signifies is that you don't necessarily have that default trust in your environment, and you start with trusting no one, and then always verifying everything that is coming in and out of your environment. So that's the basic of how people usually connect zero trust as a model or a theory. But it goes, as you said, it goes way much deeper into what it essentially means. There are different organizations that put their own spin on the terminology. Some are much more complex, elaborate, and define what it really means, versus some have kept it simple. Usually, the Microsoft definition that you would see, and they've got a lot of architecture there, is pretty simple. And to complement Microsoft, it is really good that anybody who's starting off can learn from it. But our job today is just to unfold and unpack what that simple definition really means. And when you are operating in a complex enterprise or an organization, what it should mean to that organization. So, in simple terms, zero trust is a conceptual security model that's associated with a set of security controls which are protecting your digital assets, and they solely do not rely on the obsolete model of having a perimeter defined firewall or a perimeter defined security solution. So in a nutshell, what it's meaning to say is that it's an evolving model, or an architecture that you define, which is not driven just by a single product out there, but it's a complicated mechanism for you to be able to layer your defense, use those strong security controls like defense in depth, micro segmentation, to be able to make sure that the assets that are important for the organization, be it cloud assets, be it operational technology, be it the data that you host on premises, gets the required level of protection, and in a way where you've got a lot of assurance that the controls you've put in are functioning properly. Now,
Okay.
what that then means for the organization is that you break it down into multiple pillars or tenants for zero trust, right? So starting off with the key backbone for zero trust is that it needs to provide you with cybersecurity, right? So that's where the cybersecurity or the strategy comes in really important. So if you've got backing of your C-suite, they understand what zero trust means for your organization security posture, you're already on the right path. But then having that backup from your C-suite is important, but you need to deliver to their confidence as well, right? So that's where a good cybersecurity governance layer comes into play. You've got people who understand processes, procedures, define those dimensions for you to then break it down into the different pillars of zero trust. The first one here is identity. So with zero trust, what you need to do is understand that it's a combination of multiple pillars working together to provide you that holistic approach of security. And then it's not just these pillars, but there are complementary controls as well. For example, monitoring, as well as context analysis, as well as automation. These are add-ons to the five core pillars, but also provide a lot of maturity in the sense that identity cannot operate in silo without having good visibility. Same goes with devices, same goes with network, as well as you would see a lot of overlap. So these pillars do not operate in silos again, right?
Hmm.
So identity needs to be able to complement your network. Network needs to be able to complement your devices that then need to complement your application, and then all of them complementing together your data, right? So you would see that when it's a holistic view of zero trust, it's all these pillars working together, forming a solid architecture roadmap blueprint that the organization always refers to and builds on, so that all of these entities provide an overall risk based approach to mitigating cyber.
So
And
if you take
then what you
example
would
of,
see,
but
yep.
sorry to interrupt here, Pushpe. So if you're talking about the zero trust, like normally if you're talking about the traditional network security architecture perspective and all that, so we have a logic that okay, by VPN we basically establish a connection and we gain access to the systems and all that, and we had a concept of economy of mechanism where we talk about keep it simple with the help of SSO and federation. How this is basically different from that? And how is it something is enhancing the existing economy of mechanism and SSO, or how it actually it works?
So that's a great question. And the way I see zero trust is that it builds upon those solid foundations. So traditionally, talking about a very simple VPN implementation, what it signifies is that you've got users across the globe that want connectivity into your environment, right? Now, that connectivity is only authenticating you or authorizing you into the environment, but where these controls essentially lack some of the capabilities that maybe the device posture during VPN is not incorporating a lot of different dimensions that have been populated, which are now being taken into account when you've got a zero trust implementation. A lot of customers that we've spoken to, once a user is authenticated into the environment via VPN, they essentially sometimes have a free run in terms of moving east west in their network, reaching out to everything, right? But that's where zero trust comes into play. Within network pillar, you've got something called network microsegmentation, which then really helps you reduce that connectivity and boils it down to why do you need this access, and that question is always populated to that user. So because you're authenticating always, you're authorizing each request, you're not essentially opening up your entire network based on hey, this guy authenticated 10 days ago. Now he's a free run into the organization and he's able to do everything. The logic here is to make sure that you are not giving someone default access because they've bypassed one door.
Security
So
mechanism.
it's a security mechanism, layering those defenses, making sure that you, if possible, look at each request, validate it, and ensure that it's going to the right people. Okay. Uh, for one of the customers that we try to bring in this, they were really amazed with how much of additional east-west traffic was going in their environment from users that really didn't need to have access to that information. So, uh, just a hypothetical example, let's say you've got a contractor has got VPN access into your environment, and if they're able to reach servers that host your financial data, that's something that you don't want to expose, right? So having those flows defined, who's accessing what, that table or inventory is really critical for you to be able to say, okay, I don't want this person going here. And it's no different from how you've structured your physical environments in the offices, right? So people in majority of the offices, you would see legal sits on one floor, finance sits on one floor, HR sits on one, and that's their way of physically segregating people. But that necessarily doesn't translate into your virtual environment, right? Because people just connect with IP addresses. If the firewall rules are a little open or not very frequently updated, these punch holes can open up, right? And that's where zero trust comes into play, that it just brings your network security beyond that firewall control and maybe pushing it to as low as the server itself, right? So you could have automation in place. There's tooling available out there that can help you do it. So you could have policies readily applied through automation to the end server as well, which is where you've got this capability that, hey, I don't know this IP address. This has never connected to me. I don't want to connect with this one. And what this does is it brings a lot of capability around ransomware, as well as isolating environments if you are in that incident response mode, right? Within a few clicks, you can isolate that server, you can isolate whatever the affected environment is, and then make sure that it doesn't spread. So this is very critical, also important for from an incident response point of view.
Okay. So the same example you said about as an engineer, connecting with the VPN and all that. So here, when I say authentication is a part of SSO, but authorization will
Yeah.
be granular, you mean to say in zero trust.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And when we're talking about the cybersecurity strategy and governance, how we basically involve this governance and cybersecurity strategy, like in terms of you talking about policies or no, because we normally talk about a generic thing, tenants, identity, device, network, there's a sequence, but we never talk about governance strategies. What is the role of governance here?
So governance really plays a big and important role here. The reason being that you need that governance level or an overarching pillar that can ensure that all of these pillars operate at their optimum level or maturity.
Mm.
So, for example, uh, when we talk about zero trust, right, it's not just, hey, I want to pick up the best zero trust solution and implement in my environment. It's not that simple. It's not just vendor driven, but it's an overall architecture, design, and approach for your organization where different components complement each other to build up that solution. So if you don't have a solid governance layer, policies, procedures, as well as focus on building those blueprints that define how all of these need to mature and to what level, then you may have a disconnect. For example, we've learned that a lot of organizations have invested a lot of money in building tooling around identity, which gives them a lot more capability at a granular level. But what we have seen is that their data classification program hasn't even kicked off, right? So now you've got a lot of capability in one pillar, but you don't know the assets that you're trying to protect. Yes, you can have multi-factor authentication, best in the breed, but when someone comes in, you don't know if once he's authenticated or authorized, what is he able to access and why, right? So those questions are not there, and that's where the challenge or the probable benefit of having solid governance is that it keeps you on track. It helps you define all of those solid foundations that will then help you balance all these pillars out. And there, essentially, you can have a little bit of imbalance on these pillars, but you can't have a maturity level of five in one and then zero in the other, right? So it
Makes
needs
sense.
to be a balanced approach, and that's where I think the plays a really important point.
That's great. Thanks for raising, addressing that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on, and I've got a couple of slides that do talk about governance and how you build that approach in. So maybe a few more questions might get answered, or a couple more doubts might get answered in the follow-up slides. So just backstory again, I touched upon this a little earlier as well, but based on the experience and what we have seen in the market, what people from Forrester and other organizations are also reporting about zero trust is that when we talk about moving away from a perimeter based approach and using that approach of always verify, that may have different meaning to different organization, and it's not a very streamlined process in terms of saying, hey, I want to implement a edge firewall, and then you look at metrics around different vendors and then just go and buy that product, right? It's a lot more intense data driven process, which needs you to unpack a lot of organization based needs and then understand what is it that your organization means from a parameter, no parameter uh, defense, right? For example, there's an organization that operates most of it functionality using SaaS product off the shelf or on cloud. Their parameter may look very different from a traditional organization that's still living in an on-premise or a private data center, right? So
Mm.
that's where the approach needs to be really different. Someone may want to opt in for a SASE solution, whereas the other one may be just using the traditional firewall as well as SD-WAN and the traditional security, right? So again, the parameter keeps changing, and based off of that, you need to have a solution that defines the gap that you've got and the risk that your organization is exposed to.
And I believe the demand of the solution came into the picture after the post COVID and all that. The things when things goes hybrid and people have
Yes,
yes.
absolutely. So that push from COVID making people virtually remote within a day or two, and then that thrust around making sure that people were able to connect from multiple different locations, as well as the requirement around bandwidth scale up, as well as connectivity requirements, right, was a big push. But again, as we see a slowdown and a normalcy coming back into play, right? Some of these organizations who've had to rush into implementing these solutions are now looking at it from a more strategic lens in terms of saying, what is it that we can use that provides us that capability when there's a spike, but as well as we don't compromise on our solution and security, right? So making sure that all of these things are factored in before they go and try and purchase the next solution, right?
Makes sense.
The second one is really around understanding what zero trust would mean for you in terms of security, uh, because it's essentially a business driver. With zero trust, you help the business explore multiple different opportunities. You try and enhance the positive outcome and reduce the risk within the risk appetite of the organization, right? But it has to be a pragmatic approach in terms of developing that system or the structure that can support the zero trust uh, journey that the organization is willing to go, right? It's not a very streamlined process. Again, I iterating that the journey is long, but it's a very fruitful process if done in the right way and in the right approach. The
Great.
third thing I want to emphasize on is that it's no single vendor solution that you can just go and plug in and then say, hey, I am now in line with zero trust from today onwards, right? It's an iterative approach. It's multiple different vendor solution working together. A lot of the components in the organization would still be legacy or existing environment. You can't just throw out all your switches and routers and firewalls and say, I want to just bring everything zero trust aligned, right? No, it has to be a com not a complex, but an environment that complements existing solution with the new ones. And that's where a gap analysis comes in really handy to understand what kind of capabilities or outcomes I want from zero trust. What are the current existing capability? Where are the gaps in capability? And what tooling can I bring in? Or what solutions or what changes in the architecture sometimes can I bring in to develop those or to bridge those gaps that I found, right? So sometimes it's just re-architecting your firewalls to complement what you would want in your environment. It's as simple as that, right? But sometimes it is going out shopping for a different vendor to get you to where you want to be, right?
Great.
So that's a key insight, because sometimes customers do approach us and say, we want zero trust. Can we go with vendor X? And the answer is always, we don't know, but let's go together into an analysis mode and find out and see if X is good for you or Y, or do you have something already in place that's good enough, right? So that's an approach that we as security architects or zero trust practitioners need to implement to be able to bring the best out of this journey of zero trust.
That's great.
Yes. So moving on, one of the biggest questions that we as individuals or security practitioner or organizations wanting to adopt zero trust need to uh, answer is, what does zero trust mean for you, right? Are you looking to protect one zone in your environment? Is it a data driven approach? Is it application asset? Do you want to make sure that people who are connecting across the globe, including contractors, third party, are only accessing information and your environment is safe, your IP is safe? If you're Coca-Cola, you don't want that recipe to be going out, right? You want to protect it at all cost. Now, that's where the protection surface comes into play. That's where aligning your protection service to the business objectives comes into play. That's where building a roadmap for zero trust adoption before going out and shopping for that solution comes into place. That's where enforcing policies comes into place, and that's where uh, the overall education and maturity of the organization would happen if it's a well structured, thoughtful process and roadmap around how you would go about adopting it, right? So I've spoken multiple times about the business led approach. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you how that flow or approach has worked for an organization. And maybe it's a template that our viewers can try and adopt. But again, one thing with zero trust is that it is like a tailored suit. For every person it would be different. It will depend on your dimensions, and again, for every organization, zero trust, the approach, the model may be slightly different. But if you look at some of the solid defining principles, they at a high level do not change too much.
And it is not a solution, it is an architecture.
It is a solution. It is not a solution, it is an architecture, or in fact it's a high level strategy, right, that keeps evolving, and then your architecture would keep evolving with that strategy as well, right? So again, reiterating the fact that it's a journey, a longer one. So it's not a 6 months program that you start and finish and be quick about it. Yes, there would be some low hanging fruits, quick wins that you can do. For example, if you don't have monitoring of your environment turned on, it's a cloud native environment, fairly easy for you to start that, and funneling it into your SIEM solution may be an easy win. But that's going to come at a later stage when you identify what are your key gaps, right? But at a high level, without zero trust, you are just preparing your organization to kick off that process. Basic might include those low hanging fruits. For example, making sure that all your users, when authenticating, do have an MFA map to it. Simple. But intermediate or advanced may be much more complex solutions or architectures that need to be developed to provide that holistic view, right? So an
So,
organization can aim to achieve maturity level 2 in all the 5 pillars, and that's absolutely fine. Doesn't mean that you are not on your zero trust journey. It's just that, like with any other assessment, right? NIST maturity or any other framework maturity, you have your own path definition. Where your organization is drives where your organization can be in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? So depending
understood.
on that, you can set your goals and then make sure that those goals are then the key focus of all the programs that you run within the organization.
Great.
All right. So now again, business led strategy again is important for you to have the business view at all times, because it's the business that keeps the lights running, pays for your cybersecurity, and then cybersecurity repays the business back by ensuring the risk is within the risk appetite. So then taking a business led approach, you always think of what are the key goals or drivers for business first from the solution architecture strategy point of view. Those then define what your planning, your budget, your roadmap should be. That then leads you into developing those architecture patterns, designs, blueprint that can be implemented in the environment for you to operate in a safe way and maintain the risk within the organization to an acceptable level. And the three key components throughout this process are people, process, technology. A lot of focus is always on technology, buying that shiny new tool, going for shopping, everybody loves it. But it's the other two pillars where people need to be aware of what they are trying to achieve, communicate with each other, and then have a solid process defined around it to say, this is what I want to do, that's how I want to do, and this is with what I will do it, right? And that's always a better approach than just going and buying and shopping for stuff.
But you won't get the best ISO award, na?
uh, you could get awards, or you could make sure that your organization is pretty safe. You could do both as well, but I would prefer just making sure that it's a solid architecture. All right. Okay. So coming back to, as we said, the strategy starts with you understanding what the drivers for the business are and what do they mean uh, for zero trust from a business lens, right? So you could have your CISO or the board come to you and say, hey, can we protect our organization and improve our security posture at the same time, right? That's a business driver. And then they can come back and say, can we use zero trust? I've gone through this great article, I've read through this new report, or I've heard the CISO of X say zero trust model has worked for them, right? So always ask that question. Yes, that's great, but how do you see that or envision it from your end for our organization? And the answer might come back and say, hey, the next time we are into a ransomware, I don't want to pay anything. Or next time we into that ransomware exercise, I don't want to pay more than 5 million. Those are all business driven goals. The approach will be defining what the outcome is, as well as how mature the organization is, can define what your end result or goal could be, right? Maybe you can't protect your organization if it's hit by ransomware in the next 5 days, but you definitely can improve over the next 6 months to make sure that you make it damn difficult for the attacker to get into your environment, right?
True.
Then they better be the best of the best to make sure that they find a loophole in your environment. And that's the goal from a security architect point of view, right?
True.
So once you've built those organization drivers, you've found a solid understanding of what the business really wants to do from a zero trust point of view and why they want to spend millions of dollars and give you a handle of signing those checks. What you should traditionally look to do is define that what that driver means for each individual pillar, because all those definitions might mean different things. So for example, protecting your environment and making sure that you're not paying too much or you're protected from ransomware. From an identity point of view, it may be that you authenticate and authorize each device based on their posture, based on every request that flows through, right? You implement least privilege, you implement segregation, you protect or define personas, you've got PAM solutions that protect your privileged users, right? All of that will then flow in because you know what your driver from a business point of view it is, and then how does it impact the individual pillar or model for zero trust. Now some of these drivers will overlap between multiple pillars, and that's good because it's from a high level 10,000 feet view, just one big architecture or a strategy or a solution, not too many different pillars working in silo, right? So for example, having authentication, authorization, what it does is it tells you what data or what application the user is going to access, right?
Mm.
Now that's where data comes into play as a pillar, and then having classification, understanding of your critical application where that data is stored will help you define these policies in identity. So that's how these pillars work together to make sure that it's a cohesive functionality or an architecture or a solution that's defined for the organization.
Okay.
Now, talking about the roadmap, we've understood what the business wants. We've understood what those drivers from an individual pillar perspective mean. But now we need a map to be able to say, okay, we understand where we need to go as a destination. What's the path that I need to define? And the path to eternity of zero trust is through understanding your gaps first, understanding what solutions you've got on ground and where are those key gaps. Then the next is you define your goal and objective from that gap analysis in terms of saying, hey, I don't have, or we recently merged with an organization that did not apply MFA to all its users. That's a goal from an organization point of view to bring that maturity of MFA to the same level. So maybe that's a goal for you that's sitting on priority. Can we get security in there first? We don't need to buy more tooling. We've already got the capability. It's just the process implementation that needs to happen. So that goes into your overall goals and objectives, right? Then you define a framework, which is to say what are our principles, what are our policies, what are things that we would do, what are things that we would not do. Obviously you can't achieve everything, it will never be a perfect world, but what
Mm.
we are striving for is it a secure world with the imperfections that we've got, right? So that's always the goal, to get security to the best capability with the resourcing that we've got, and then have a plan to define maturity, right? One of the things that we've learned with the customer was that for them, out of this exercise, the biggest pain point that came through was we do not have a good vulnerability management system. And interestingly, that organization is going through a cloud transformation journey as well. Now, vulnerability management traditionally versus in cloud can be very different, right?
True.
So, what happened was that we spoke to them in that journey around cloud and we said, what's your approach in terms of building infrastructure in the cloud? Are you pivoting towards containers? Are you rehosting, replatforming? What are you doing? And the end goal for them, or the solution was for them, was to a use cloud native tools, and b make sure that they've got a consistent automated way of figuring out vulnerabilities and making sure that they're not uh, too much of a problem in the cloud environment. So a simple solution was, can we use global golden AMIs? So you only do analysis or testing and standardize your process. Have one image that's then basis of a standardized standard security set defined image that's then used for all your platforms, right? Fairly easy process to achieve in cloud, very complex to implement in on premise, but they were in that journey. And using this framework, especially the gap analysis, we could use a process update to deliver zero trust, right? And that's the beauty of this, that zero trust can be anything that you want it to be. It just needs the vision from someone to say, oh, I've looked at it from this lens, right? So very interesting approach that was taken. Nobody would say, oh, having good AMIs or golden image in the cloud correlates to zero trust, but yes, it indeed does, because it's strengthening our defense. It's helping us operate off a baseline, a solid baseline, a tested baseline. So ensuring that we operate as a standard environment, right? Reduces a lot of overhead and management in the environment as well.
Great.
So yeah. So moving on, once you've got those frameworks defined, then you identify what's priority for you. You define what your roadmap for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years should look like, where your focus needs to be. Then you go into fine grained implementation, prioritization of what needs to go in first. As I said, maybe MFA enablement is probably priority one versus those long haul changes into maybe your WAN connectivity or something else, right? And then you do a continuous monitoring and risk based analysis to make sure that it's a cycle, a feedback loop where you can improvise, understand your evolving threat and risk associated with those. And then what you've got is a solid foundation in terms of knowing where it is evolving and where you need to enhance or implement more security or fine tune your processes around it.
Okay.
And obviously, training and education, I think, is a core pillar and backbone of making sure that we as individuals understand the importance, because people can be the enabler or the weak link for security, right? So we need to ensure that they understand what needs to happen, always from top down, making sure that everybody is feeling responsible, accountable, as well as equipped to handle security the right way.